Konnichiwa. Last week, we talked about the helper adjectival noun, so, and how we use it to express what something might be like, our impression of something, and hearsay. Today, we're going to talk about other ways of expressing a similar range of ideas, how they work, how they are similar, and how they are different. So, we're going to look at dashi, which is a helper adjective. And this is an adjective ending in shi, which is what we can call a subclass of adjectives. All real adjectives, as you know, end in e. So-called adjectives that don't end in e are in fact adjectival nouns. But a group of those e-ending adjectives ends with shi. As you see, it's still ending in e, but it also has shi, so it's shi, and the characteristic of this group of adjectives is that, on the whole, they express subjectivities. That is to say, not exact, measurable qualities, but things which are, to some extent, dependent upon human or other sentient beings' impression of them. So, for example, kanashi is sad, ureshi is happy, muzukashi means difficult, and while this seems somewhat more objective than ureshi and kanashi, it's still in some way a subjectivity, because difficulty is relative to particular individuals. Whether you find a thing difficult or easy depends to a large extent on who you are and what your abilities are. So this, as we'll see, gives us an indication of what kind of a word this is and how it differs from so. Its use is very simple. Like so, it can be attached either to an individual word or to a complete logical clause or sentence. And the attachment is absolutely simple because we never do anything at all except just put dashi after the word or after the completed logical clause. We don't change anything, we don't do anything. So it really couldn't be easier. Now, as with so, if we put it after a single word, we are talking about our impressions of that particular object. If we put it after a completed clause, we are saying it seems to be that way. However, there is a difference. If we put soda after a completed clause, as you know, we complete the clause, if necessary, with another da, and that usage means that we've heard that sentence is the case. So if we say, ano dobutsu wa usagi da soda, we're saying, I've heard that animal is a rabbit. Now, if we say, ano dobutsu wa usagi da rashii, we're saying, it seems that animal is a rabbit. Now that can mean the same thing as usagi da soda. It can mean, I've heard that it's a rabbit. And sometimes the textbooks get quite convoluted and confusing about whether rashi actually means I've heard or whether it means it seems. But it's very simple if you understand exactly what it's doing. What it's doing is actually saying it appears or it seems. And it has exactly the same ambiguity and lack of ambiguity as that has in English. So let's take the case of this mysterious animal. Suppose I'm looking at it with a group of people, and afterwards you come up to me and say, what is that animal? And I say, usagi da rashi. Now, I've given a complete sentence with rashi on the end, and the natural meaning here would be, I heard from those people that it was a rabbit. Now you see, this is just the same as if in English I say, it appears that it's a rabbit. Now you would take me in English or in Japanese to be saying, from what I heard from those people, it's a rabbit. Now, take a different scenario. The rabbit's gone, and I'm examining its footprints. And you come up to me and say, what was that animal? And I say, usagi datta rashi. Again, it appears that it was a rabbit, or it seems that it was a rabbit. In this case, you will probably conclude from what I'm doing that by saying it appears it was a rabbit, I'm saying from the evidence I'm looking at here, the appearances are that it's a rabbit. So you see, there's nothing particularly grammatical or complicated about this. It's just the same as in English. If you said it appears that it's a rabbit or it seems that it's a rabbit, it depends on context, whether that implies that that's the information you've heard or that that's the conclusion you're drawing from your observations. If you want to be completely unambiguous, that you're talking about hearsay, that you're talking about something you heard from other people, then you say Usagi datta soda. That is unambiguous. That can only mean I heard it from somebody. Now, when we apply rashi to an individual word, the most immediate difference between rashi and soda is that we can't apply soda to a regular noun. We can only apply it to an adjectival noun, and there's a good reason for that. We'll get to it in a moment. Rashi, you can apply it to any kind of noun, whether it's an adjectival noun or whether it's a regular noun. But it really comes into its own when it's being applied to regular nouns. As you would expect from the fact that it is a she adjective, that's to say that we would expect it to be expressing a greater degree of subjectivity. It has the ability to liken one thing to another. So we can say, Anoda wutsu wa usagi rashi. That animal is rabbit-like. That animal is like a rabbit. Now, the difference between this and so, apart from the fact that you can only apply so to adjectival nouns, and this is why you can only apply so to adjectival nouns, is that when we say Anoda wutsu wa usagi rashi, we are not necessarily conjecturing that it is in fact a rabbit. We may be completely aware that it isn't a rabbit, and we are simply saying that it's like a rabbit. It's a rabbit-like animal. And of course we can turn it around into that kind of an adjective too. Usagi rashi dobutsu, a rabbit-like animal. And again, it's just the same as in English. If we say that animal looks like a rabbit, we could mean I'm guessing that it is a rabbit, or we could mean it's probably not a rabbit, but it certainly looks like one. Now this widens out into even greater areas of subjectivity. For example, we can say that something has the qualities of something. For example, otoko rashi. Otoko is a manly man, a man who possesses the qualities of a man. If we talk about someone who's not a teacher and we say sensei rashi, that person is like a teacher. We might or might not be conjecturing that she is in fact a teacher. But if we know that she's a teacher and we say Sakura sensei wa sensei rashi, we mean that she behaves like a teacher. She is a teacher and she has the right qualities and manner for being a teacher. Conversely, we could say Sakura sensei wa sensei rashiku nai. And in that case, we're saying, well, we know she's a teacher, but she doesn't behave like one. She doesn't act like a teacher. So you see, with rashi, we are getting into much more subjective areas. We're not simply guessing whether something is in fact delicious or interesting, which we can confirm by experience. We're talking about our impressions and beliefs and subjectivities surrounding the phenomenon. Now, we can also say things like, for example, if Sakura says something unpleasant, and usually she's a very sweet girl, we might say, Sore wa Sakura rashiku nai. That wasn't like you, Sakura. So we're talking about the qualities, the subjectively perceived qualities of a thing. So in some areas it overlaps with soda, but in other areas it moves forward into more subtle and subjective areas. Now we're also going to quickly look at poi, which is a small tsu followed by poi. So we have a little break between that and what we're saying. So if we want to say childish, we might say kodomo poi. Works very much like rashi. It's also a helper adjective. It's much more casual than rashi, and we usually hear it in exactly that form. Kodomo poi, usagi poi. You can't use poi on the end of a completed clause. You can only attach it to a word. And apart from its colloquial nature, a difference in tendency from rashi is that rashi will tend to imply that the quality is what something ought to have. Poi often tends to imply the opposite. There's no hard and fast rule here, but there tends to be a positive inclination in rashi and a negative one in poi, although you will certainly hear them used the other way around on some occasions. So kodomo rashi is more likely to imply the child behaving in a way proper to a child, whereas kodomo poi tends to mean childish. In fact, in English, we could say kodomo rashi means childlike and kodomo poi means childish. Although it's not as hard and fast as that is in English, it could be used the other way around without breaking any actual laws. When I first appeared in this particular shell, this body that I'm wearing now, I am of course the ghost in the shell, I was talking in English, introducing it, but I made a little aside in Japanese because I really don't know quite how to say this in English. I said, "What do you think of me when I look like this? Ningen poi ne?" Ningen poi ne? It's very human looking, isn't it? And while it wasn't exactly disparaging, the sense of what I was saying was, good heavens, in this shell, I look really more human than I actually am, don't I? Which I think is why some people call me creepy, because I'm probably just a little bit too human looking for someone who isn't human. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. And I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします. Class dismissed.